Welcome to part 2 of this linear series exploring the fundamental concept from the book Linear Freedom. In the previous video, we explored the basic concept as it relates to the core phrases that comprise 1 or 2 bass drum strokes that are not consecutive. So today we're tackling the material found on page 32 of Linear Freedom, which tackles the consecutive bass drum strokes. Now, there are various ways in a 4-stroke phrase to insert 2 bass drum strokes. We have essentially 2 rules. Those 2 bass drum strokes need to be consecutive, and we don't want to end up with a combination that has 3 consecutive strokes. This will come into force later on when we explore the combinations, but I'll show you what I mean shortly. So essentially, on page 32, we find 4 core phrases that meet the criteria. And again, this permutates those 2 bass drum strokes through 4/16 notes. So very simply, they sound like this. I will do each of them 4 times around the drums. Two bass drum strokes at the beginning, the 2 bass drum strokes in the middle, the 2 bass drum strokes at the end, or the 2 bass drum strokes on either side. They are the 4 possible places in which we can place 2 consecutive bass drum strokes. Now, these are nothing new. Many of you will have encountered these phrases before, especially the first one. It's probably the most common linear phrase in existence because it's relatively easy to work up to quite a fast speed. It's a staple of the linear idiom, right? That's not our goal here. Our goal, as in the previous video, is linear improvisation. So, there's a few things to note here. Most importantly, we need to once again address the sticking concept because we don't want to end up in a situation where our sticking is reversed or we are trying to play one of these linear phrases and we are unsure on which sticking to use. So, if you recall from the previous video, we used a concept as it relates to a single bass drum stroke that the same hand that plays before the bass drum plays again after the bass drum. Well, in the sense of 2 consecutive bass drum strokes, that concept is completely reversed. The opposite hand than the one that played before the bass drum must resume the single stroke roll after the bass drum. So, if we play right, left, we finished on a left hand. The 2 bass drum strokes play again, so we resume with the opposite hand. Right, left, kick, kick, right. Why is that? Because the 2 bass drum strokes replace a right and a left. Right, left, kick, kick. We're back on the right hand again. If we look at the second phrase, where the bass drum strokes are in the middle of the passage, right, kick, kick, left, right, kick, kick, left, the right hand comes before the 2 bass drums, so the opposite hand comes afterwards. Why is that? Because the 2 bass drums in the middle replace a left and a right hand. Right, kick, kick, left. In the same fashion that we did last time, we can maintain a steady single stroke roll and we can focus solely on this concept. If I begin the bass drum strokes after a left hand, I resume on the right hand. If I begin the bass drum strokes after a right hand, I resume on the left hand. Now, this is a little bit more complicated than that found in the previous video because of the 4th phrase. The 4th phrase is a kick, left, right, kick. So if you repeat it, it does have 2 consecutive bass drum strokes, but it only begins with 1 bass drum stroke on the first instance of that. So this can be a little bit disconcerting if you're not used to it. So the way we deal with this is, as in the first video, we tackle the 4 phrases individually first, and we become very, very comfortable with them mechanically. We want to familiarize ourselves with these, get to know them very, very well. So I'm going to use that 4th phrase as my example today. I'm simply going to do what I did last time and take it around the drums in no particular order, always paying attention to kick, left, right, kick, kick, left, right, kick, and trying to move those hands as freely as I can. I'll do it against a left foot pulse so you can hear the beat each time. Now, of course, we quite quickly find that that single phrase on its own is not particularly interesting, so our next step is to try some combinations. Now, this is where it comes into play, where I said we don't want to end up with a combination that comprises or contains 3 consecutive bass drum strokes. So if we were to combine this 4th pattern with the 3rd, we would strike a problem. That 3rd pattern begins with the 2 bass drum strokes, kick, kick, right, left. So if our first phrase is kick, right, left, kick, 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 right, left, we have a passage containing 3 consecutive bass drum strokes. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but for most practical purposes, we don't really want it to happen. We can't play it as fast, it's not as flowing, it's a little bit unidiomatic, so of course it is a valid linear phrase, but for the purposes of this concept, we're essentially going to ignore it, because we are focused on improvisational vocabulary that is practical and easily usable. So instead, we are going to combine this with the second phrase, kick, left, kick, kick, left. So this is the phrase with the 2 bass drums on either end, and combining it with the phrase with the 2 bass drums in the middle. This gives us a 2-beat phrase which actually flows really nicely. So as before, I'm going to continue this around the drums, playing this phrase constantly and trying to become as familiar with it as I can. And it's worth saying, as I'm doing this, I'm really trying to pay careful attention to that sticking pattern phrase, that sticking concept. The opposite hand than the one that plays before the bass drums plays afterwards. I know it's a lot to think about, but this is the point where we internalize it. So in the case of a single bass drum, same hand before as after. In the case of 2 consecutive bass drums, opposite hand after as the one that came before. In practicing the combinations, in practicing the phrases individually, this will steadily become embedded into us. This is how we apply this vocabulary within the same style as last time. We are aiming for improvisational freedom. The book is called Linear Freedom, and that is the point here. We want to be able to improvise completely freely with this linear vocabulary. Now, I'm going to skip a step here because I want to conclude this 2-part series by combining the vocabulary from the previous video with the vocabulary from this video. This is all of the material with a single bass drum, non-consecutive bass drum strokes, combined with all of the material with 2 consecutive bass drum strokes. Now, there are hundreds of possible combinations, and we can't learn and memorize them all. But luckily, learning and memorizing them all is not the point. The point is to internalize the sticking concept. Single bass drum stroke, same hand before as after, 2 consecutive bass drum strokes, opposite hand after as came before. I know it starts to sound a little confusing, but when you start practicing just 1 or 2 simple combinations, it starts to become ingrained quite strongly. So to see this, I'm simply going to combine 2 phrases. I'm going to combine the first phrase from the previous chapter with the second phrase from this chapter. The second phrase from this chapter is right, kick, kick, left. So our 2-part combination combines a single bass drum phrase with a 2 bass drum phrase. Kick, left, left, kick, left, right, kick. Now, over the course of practicing this, we can work this up very fast. We can work this into a fill. We can work this as a solo. But again, the individual combinations aren't really the point here. The point here is to develop the freedom, as I say. Now, in the later stages of the book, there are lots of accent studies and particular combination studies, which allow us to see these all put together in many, many combinations. But again, The idea is to develop the sense of improvisational freedom. So now, to finish with, to try and demonstrate this concept, I'm simply going to maintain a steady single-stroke roll. My hands will rove around the kit freely, at will. I don't want to say randomly because music is not random, but freely. I will use instances of dynamics, accents, and ghost notes, and at any point within that single stroke roll, I'm going to substitute in either a single bass drum stroke or 2 consecutive bass drum strokes and see how it takes us, see where it takes us. Now, crucially, any linear phrase you are about to see me play comes from one of those pages that we've just covered, either the page with the single bass drum strokes, the non-consecutive bass drum phrases, or this page with the 4 consecutive bass drum patterns. However, at no point am I thinking in those terms. At no point am I thinking of I'm combining pattern 1 from that page with pattern 6 from this page or anything like that. There's none of that going on. This is entirely improvisational. But I have developed this over the course of many years of developing this material, practicing it, combining them, and crucially, focusing on that sticking concept. So my single stroke roll will always remain constant. My right hand will always be on the beat. My left hand will always be on the offbeat 16th notes. And I am freely improvising with these linear patterns. This concept can apply to any time signature and any subdivision. And I was just trying to demonstrate a few simple ideas there, stringing it together, trying some simple grooves, trying some simple fills, and just seeing where it takes me. So I hope this has given you a few ideas. The whole idea is to learn a few pieces of core vocabulary and then take them and improvise with them straight away. We don't want to be memorizing. We don't want to be focusing on chops and speed. We want to be combining them in a way that makes sense using a very simple sticking concept that we don't actually have to think about. And that is what the book achieves, and that is what I was trying to demonstrate there. If you've enjoyed what I do, please visit my website. I offer online video lessons, lessons in the studio, a whole array of publications on this and other topics. Otherwise, I would just love to hear from you. Stop by, say hello, and send any questions you may have. Linear Freedom is available now, physically and digitally, anywhere in the world. I hope you'll check it out. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and good luck in your own playing. See you next time. Cheers.